the Philadelphia Eagles coaching staff here. Before I did this, I went back and I did some history on all the coaches. Now, I didn't go knee deep in all the coaches. Okay? I didn't go knee deep into all the coaches. But what I did was I looked at Sirianni, Brian Johnson, Sean Desai, Michael Clay, Jeff Stoutland, Matt Patricia. Okay? And here is the coaching staff, and here is the position room of coaches that the Eagles have. And I'm going to start it with your head coach, Nick Sirianni. Entering his third year. 23-11. Most wins by a coach in his first 2 seasons in franchise history. Best record ever. His strengths, knows both sides of the room, front office and players. Okay? He knows both sides of the room. He knows how to play both sides of the room. And again, I don't think it's strategically done. I think this is an innate thing that Nick has. And that is the fact that, okay, to be a good head football coach, you've got to kind of be like the Pied Piper for what the front office wants. And what you're doing is you're playing both sides. Front office wants to have this style of defense. I'm going to work with this style of defense. And get this, it's working. That's why everybody's on the same page. We're going to work this style of offense. That's why you're not going to see very much change on both sides of the football, because this is an organizational decision. This isn't a Nick Sirianni decision. This is not Nick Sirianni's offense. If you remember right, his offense was taken away from him at 2-5. The offense that Nick wanted to run in Philadelphia was taken from him. When he was play calling and the type of offense he wanted, it was failing. So the front office and Nick came up and said, we're not getting anywhere with this. He's not a drop back guy. What do you want to do? Then they implemented Shane Steichen. Then they put the RPO in. And once they put the RPO in, they completely played to the strengths of Lane, Jalen, the O-line, the running game, everything on that offense just clicked. And basically what they did was they figured it out. Okay? And Nick is part of that process. Okay? Hey, Seals, you want to know what 40 whiners common denominator with delusional and butthurt dumb organizations? With Dallas, no rings. Absolutely. They get in the way of themselves. This is another example of the Eagles not getting in the way of each other. And Nick knows that. Do you know how hard it is for an NFL coach like a Doug Peterson or Andy Reid not to have their own imprint or thumbprint on a organization? Do you know what Nick Sirianni's thumbprint is on this organization? Is that he understands both sides of the room. I mean, take a look at this. Look at Dallas, for instance. Mike McCarthy, for the first time in Dallas, is going to have say in his team. How long has he been there? He's finally going to have say in his team because he's going to be a play caller. Prior to that, he was like a librarian. Okay? He was like a librarian. And remember something, the more equity Nick gets with winning and going along with what they're doing, the more they're going to listen to him. Dude, when Nick Sirianni was 2-5, how much equity do you think he had in the room? 0. You don't listen to a coach who's 2-5 and offense is sputtering, going nowhere. But when you start winning because you know what you do, I got to be a better head coach. I got to oversee more as a delegator. Sirianni's gone from being a play. I'll tell you this. I don't think people understand this. I had this told to me from numerous coaches. You know the transition that college coaches or college quarterbacks have to make from that level to the NFL? We see it all the time. Some guys struggle, some guys don't, right? Well, what do you think that struggle is from being a coordinator to being a head coach? You still think you're a head coach, and you can't put down the OC or DC headsets. Happened to Patricia in Detroit. We see it all the time with guys you thought would make good coaches, but when they took off their side of the ball and had to put on where you click the switch and you get OCDC, and you had to listen to both sides, they're not very good at that. Parcells said it numerous times. Hey, I was lucky I survived my first year in New York, because if I didn't survive, remember he told Phil Simms, and Simms said it here on this program. He went to Simms and says, if I survive this, we're going to win a lot of games here. Because Bill knew exactly what he had to do. I think Belichick had that same shit happen to him in Cleveland. I think Shanahan had that happen to him when he was with the Raiders. That transition's hard, man. Nick did it on the fly. You know what, too? I got to hand it to the organization. They probably told him, hey, Nick, let's let Shane. He's had more success and more working with when it came to RPO. We got Jalen Hurts. They still didn't believe it, even after the first year that Hurts was the guy. But they liked what they were running. And they went on to win. It got to the playoffs, got destroyed in the playoff game, but they saw something in Hurts. They still went and got 2-1s because they were still thinking in April they might have to get a quarterback. Well, Hurts turns in a great year. And then all of a sudden they're like, holy shit, this thing fit the personnel and our team. That is on the side of Nick Sirianni going with it. And get this, how many times do you not agree that Doug Peterson and Howie Roseman were butting heads at the end over decision-making of the roster, the direction of the team, the quarterback, the assistant coaches? It was constantly butting heads every week. Nick is not doing that. Now, you're winning. You're winning. That's part of it. Okay? That's part of it. And that's why Nick is improving as a delegator. You know, he's more Jimmy Johnson than he is Doug Peterson. I'm talking Nick Sirianni. Because Jimmy's the greatest delegator of all time. He delegates to his assistant coaches, and his assistant coaches have a lot of say in the direction of their units. North Turner ran the offense in Dallas. Dave Wannstedt or Butch Davis led those championship football teams defensively. Wasn't Jimmy, but he oversaw it. Because then what he did was, now Jimmy had the advantage. He hired all the coaches and picked all the personnel. Nick has none of that. But it's a pseudo version of it. Yeah, see, Jimmy had total say. In 5 years, won 3 Super Bowls. I mean, not much to say on that. So Sirianni's really doing well. But here's the problem with coaching. One bad year, you could be off your ass and you could be out the door. It doesn't matter. You fire a coach quicker today if he's not the right guy. Look at what they did in Arizona. They gave both Steve Keim and they gave Cliff Kingsbury contract extensions, 3-year extensions. Then the year came up, they fired them both with years still remaining on their deal. Okay? In my opinion, once again, Nick Sirianni will be evaluated every year and is tied to success of what Jalen Hurts does. He's tied to that kid's success. Brian Johnson. I went deep into this guy here, and I'm very, very... How about this? I am more encouraged on what I found out about Brian Johnson than what I was before when I said he's the least experienced offensive coordinator in the NFL. I went knee deep into him, okay? Okay, you notice the Eagles have yet to offer Sirianni an extension. they are still evaluating him. Absolutely. And dude, if you can fire Andy Reid and Doug Peterson, you can fire Nick Sirianni any moment. And Nick knows that. Nick, personally to me, I think they'll extend Nick at the end of the year if they have a great year. If they don't, they won't. Okay? I look at Brian Johnson. He's been in the Eagle organization now for 3 years. He was the quarterback coach 2021 and 22. And here's where the relationship is to the organization and why I think there's more positive here now with Brian Johnson taking over at OC than what thought in the past by me. He was a former Gator offensive coordinator in 2018 and 2020 under Dan Mullen. Why is that important? Because he's with Dan Mullen at Mississippi State. And the year that Dak Prescott led Mississippi State to a number 1 ranking and 4,300 passing yards was 2014. He was the OC there for Prescott. So Dan Mullen is a hell of an offensive-minded guy. And you're talking about a guy, and if you've ever heard Dan Mullen talk about a player like Dak Prescott, and let me tie it into Jalen here. I'm going to tie this into Jalen. Tone, I think you'll like this. In high school, Dak Prescott was getting no scholarship offers. Okay? No scholarship offers. 0. And somebody on the coaching staff said, you need to invite this guy to your quarterback camp and to your football camp, Dak Prescott. They saw him. He wasn't great. He was athletic, but he wasn't great. Well, Brian Johnson saw this. And they were like, you gotta offer him. So he shows up at Mississippi State his freshman year. He's not that hot. Sophomore year, he gets better. Dan Mullen notices it. He gets better. Then by the time the junior year comes around, they couldn't believe the improvement. Could not believe the improvement that he had. And by the time Brian Johnson got to him, his senior year, Dan Mullen couldn't believe how much had he increased and improved as a starting quarterback. Could not believe the improvement from high school to that camp to his final year at Mississippi State. Could not believe it. The improvement. Brian Johnson was part of that and the development of Dak. And one of the reasons the Cowboys drafted him was because Prescott had kept getting better and better and better. Well, the last 3 years, Brian Johnson's been on the coaching staff in Philadelphia, and you're seeing that same kind of Prescott improvement. So Brian Johnson has to be credited with the improvement of Jalen Hurts. He helped develop Dak Prescott. Prescott was not considered any prospect in the Southeastern Conference. He was considered no prospect. But as Brian Johnson got to him and then became the OC, I think it was in 14, his best year there, he was the offensive coordinator under Dan Mullen there. Won a shitload of games, threw for almost 4,500 yards, was great. I mean, so the guy's developed a quarterback. And he's developed players that people thought weren't going to get better. Whatever you think of Dak Prescott, Brian Johnson had a hand in his development, along with Dan Mullen. And now he's taken what he helped develop Dak with Jalen, and it's working. Here's my point. Is that when you see a guy continuing to help people get better and better, no matter if it's Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts, you have to start looking at maybe Brian Johnson's a quarterback whisperer kind of guy. Prescott he demanded that Dan Mullen give him a scholarship. No one wanted to on the staff. So the more you dive into Brian Johnson, I hate the fact he's a Gator, but it makes sense because he was with Mullen. The guy's good. He's got a background of developing quarterbacks. He's just been never given the OC job at the NFL level until now. He was a offensive coordinator at Florida and Mississippi State. Southeastern Conference, okay, maybe not the NFL, but it's better than the Big Ten. Better than the Big Ten. So if you're a Philadelphia Eagle guy, you're not that upset that Shane Steichen's out of the building. And here's another opportunity for a guy potentially to really show that maybe it's an upgrade. Who's Shane Steichen? Who does Shane Steichen? Does he get credit for that? For developing Jalen, or is it Brian? Brian on his resume's got Dak. Hey, not as bad as I thought. Not as bad as I thought. Actually, better than I thought. Ronald, we'll see. Absolutely. 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 Hey, JM, you're right. He was also at Utah, and he was the offensive coordinator at Utah. A pass-happy offense that threw the ball around a lot. Absolutely. Absolutely. Sean Desai, I'll tell you something. Again, a guy, you look into his numbers and you look into his past. He wasn't the DC in Seattle. However, Pete Carroll leaned on him a lot in Seattle. And the word up there is that they really liked him. And they wanted him on the coaching staff and thought a lot of him. And he brought a lot to the table, especially when they didn't have really a lot of great personnel up there. So you get the endorsement, basically, of Pete Carroll, who's a defensive-minded guy. That's a good thing. Then from 2013 to 21, he was in Chicago. He was the DC in 2021, okay? He's been a coordinator. They were 4th in sacks and 6th in total defense. I believe that's the year that Robert Quinn had 18.5 sacks, and they were getting to the quarterback, and they had a really great year. I think that was maybe Matt Nagy's last year up there in Chicago. But they were 6th in total defense. So he's got a resume of leading a defense and into a top 10 defense. So here's where I'm going here. Both coordinators are not as inexperienced, okay, or not as inexperienced as I thought, especially with the history, and especially with Brian Johnson. I'm absolutely impressed with Brian Johnson's background. He developed Dak. Dude, Dak Prescott, if you ever hear Dan Mullen talking about Dak Prescott, will tell you he was a nothing burger guy, practice squad guy when he got to Mississippi State. He was like a practice squad guy. And he helped develop him into being a $50 million a year player. He's part of that. Okay? Ronald goes, I think the Eagles have been good at this, cranking out coaches who get plucked. You have to look at Howie, Lurie coaching players. Ronald, absolutely. Absolutely. All through Jeffrey Lurie's history of owning the team, he's been a fabulous owner in putting a front office together that picks the right personnel in the personnel department and also in the coaching level. They've done a rock solid job here, man. And again, This is what you say when you look at these two coordinators, Brian Johnson and Sean Desai. They deserve their opportunity here. They're young. They're innovative. They're going to use the numbers. They're going to use, sabermetrics. They're going to go down that line. But they're also going to go with what the organization is known for, believing in their players and coaches and position coaches. So better than I thought. Not the least experienced guys who deserve a shot at being coordinators in the NFL. I'm there with you. I'm totally there with you on this. And I think they do deserve a shot. Michael Clay, special teams, third year. Outside of Jake Elliott, I don't see it. I don't get it. And I don't understand it. They've done nothing to improve that side of the ball. Now, maybe the Eagles look at it this way. It's not his fault. He's a good coordinator. We're just not putting good players there. But I don't see it. They're not good on kickoff coverages. They're not good at punt coverages. Like I said, if you don't have Jake Elliott, it's one of the worst units in the league. I mean, your kickoff team is suspect at best. Not very good tacklers. And then you look at your punt coverage and your punt return, it goes nowhere. I mean, why not help your team out a little more? Can you get this? So if Michael Clay and his special teams gave Jalen Hurts 10 more yards on a punt return or a kickoff return, Jesus, do you know how much advantage that would be starting on the 34-yard line instead of starting constantly on your 20? And especially when you have to go 14-play drives. I mean, make it a little easier. It's just not a very good unit. And again, I don't know if it's him or if it's just the personnel that they don't have on that unit. They just do not have very good football players there. They have kind of like, can I tell you what I think the Eagles special teams looks like? It really does look like a practice squad team. It's just a bunch of practice squad guys. Okay? That's how bad it is. You can't even point out who the problem. No, right. I don't know if it's Clay. And it's probably why he's kept his job. Because for a guy to have his job for 3 years like Michael Clay, the organization must not be helping him, and they must be telling him that. Because nobody keeps their job with a shit job like that. Unless you're just getting poor personnel. They don't tackle well. They don't cover well. They don't return well. The only thing you do is field goals and extra point. It's the only thing keeping that thing on a respirator. Other than that, you got a horrible unit. And it'll cost you in a game somewhere this season because your unit is so terrible. Okay? It's just not a very good unit. Jeff Stoutland, the best position coach in the history of the Philadelphia Eagles, and that includes Jim Johnson. A defensive coordinator versus an offensive line coach, it's not close in importance. Barkley and Jacobs are not signing the franchise tag. Should the Eagles look into Jacobs? No. Okay, why would I want to sign a guy for $14 million when I could sign Dalvin Cook for $5 million if that was the case? We'll look at that here in a minute. Jeff Stoutland is the best position coach in the history of the Philadelphia Eagles. There's no getting around it. It's the most important position coach you can have. It's the most important position you can have on your team. There's not a question, in my opinion, that he's your best. Finally here, before we close it up here, Tone, I wanted to get it done here. Matt Patricia, senior defensive assistant. And from what I'm understanding here, that's his title. Senior defensive assistant. Now, it doesn't say to who. Are you working for Desai or are you working for Nick? Who do you answer to? Do you answer to Desai? I don't know. I don't know. Neither do you. Who does he answer to? Like, does Nick Sirianni and Howie talk to him about what he's seeing? I mean, right? 5-star goes, Jim Johnson was a GOAT without a ring. Stoutland's got a ring. And 2 NFC championship rings in Philly. You tell me who's had more success developing players. Jordan Mailata, Jason Kelsey, Lane Johnson, Isaac Seumalo. He actually won Super Bowls and was an integral part of the Super Bowl run, being the run coordinator. Here's Matt Patricia's resume. Stoutland gets you paid. He sure does. Here's Matt Patricia, 2012 to 17. Listen to this. From 2012 to 2017, 2 Super Bowl championships, 3 AFC titles, 6 AFC East division titles as the defensive coordinator of the Patriots. I want to read that one more time. From 2012 to 2017, 2 Super Bowl champions, 3 AFC titles, 6 AFC East championship rings. That's who Matt Patricia is as a D coordinator. Darius Slay versus that? I don't give a shit what Darius Slay thinks. What has he done compared to that? Who are you? He also developed, Patricia, the Defensive Player of the Year. He's also developed defenses that finished in the top 3 that actually won Super Bowls. Darius Slay? Great kid. You're here 1 year. I don't really care. Overall, it's a pretty good coaching staff. Okay? How about this? It's an inexperienced coaching staff, but it's also a coaching staff that deserves an opportunity. I want to talk about Barkley, Josh Jacobs, and also Tony Pollard. They were supposed to have signed their franchise tags, and I'm sure they're still working with the Barkley. We'll give you an update on that. Keep it here. Hour number 2, National